This podcast is part of the Shareable Podcast Network. Learn more at shareable.fm. This podcast is Shareable. I'm your host, Jeff Gibbard, commonly known as the world's most handsome strategist and professional speaker. I'm also a superhero. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single Shareable episode. And that's it. That's the intro. Short and sweet. Let's get to the show. Today on Shareable, you're going to be hearing a very familiar voice. And if you were watching, which you can't really do, you would see a very familiar face. If you listen to my other podcasts where I have co-hosts, the podcast called Heroic Counsel, the voice today will be very familiar to you. And if you listen to my other podcast, Rogue, you will notice that my guest today was my very first guest on Rogue. She's a very close friend of mine. She's someone who I would call my business best friend. She calls me her business best friend. And we're constantly in contact, and I thought it would be a blast to bring her on the show and talk about what it is that she does. So today I'd like to welcome Sarah Ohanesian to Shareable. It has been a long time coming, but you are here now. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Jeff. And I have been a long-time listener of the podcast. So for me, while we're good friends, I'm sort of fanning out because it's cool to be a part of this now, a different part of your world.
Yeah, it's awesome. I remember you were on my early list of people that I promoted Shareable to before it came out, when I had like the trailer and everything. I was like, well, obviously I have to tell Sarah about it. So you and I have known each other since 2011 when we were introduced through a mutual colleague, I guess you could say, who was working on your website and brought me in, and we started working together while you were at Julian Krinsky Camps and Programs. At the time, working in marketing, elevating to the level of CMO later on, and we've just kept in touch this whole time. I think you and I are an interesting case study in, like, you can actually make friends with the people that you get to work with. So I'm really appreciative of that. I'm really glad to have you on the show today. I want to talk about a couple different things with you that I think our listeners will find interesting. The first of which is I want to talk a little bit about your entrepreneurial journey, because you are a really interesting case for people who are potentially working a job right now and thinking about jumping ship to do their own thing. So I think that's a good place for us to play. And I definitely want to dig deep into productivity. When you were on Rogue, we got to very lightly skim the surface on pieces of it. Today, I want to go a little bit deeper. And then, obviously, wherever the conversation takes us. So let's start here. You came out of school, Villanova, right?
Yeah.
Villanova. And you get this job. I know you had some internships and various things, but like the big leap is JKCP, right? So talk a little bit about what that background was. What was the work that you were doing? What did you start doing? And then kind of towards the end, what would you say your role looked like? So just kind of take us through kind of the summary of that part of your career.
Yeah, well, and I think it was a really interesting time to have a career in marketing because, as you know well, Jeff, marketing changed so much. So I started working in 2005, and social media was this thing that was vague. People didn't really know what it was. How do we use this? And it was a little bit of the Wild West. And then by time I, transitioned to being an entrepreneur, my role in marketing just was so rapidly changing all the time. So the cool part of my career was that it was constantly changing, constantly evolving. You can never get bored if you work in this space. And so that was a really cool way for me to just grow and learn and evolve. And I'm so grateful because now that I'm an entrepreneur and I'm responsible for doing all of these things really on my own, the foundation that I built in marketing has just been a tremendous, foundation to build me up to, to have the success I'm having today. So just a really tremendous experience. I started as really like a part-time hourly intern. And I think it was rare for someone of my generation to stay with one company for that long.
Yeah.
And definitely. I enjoyed it so much so because it pushed me and it challenged me and it forced me to grow and I forced it to grow. And it really became something wonderful. And to be the CMO of such a great organization was really just, an honor and just a wonderful career path for me.
So because you were working in an industry that and specifically in a company that had been around, I think at the time you joined, it was more than 20 years that the organization had been around. And this was prior to, even companies largely using websites, right? Like we're talking like it started back in the day where it was just direct mail. It was like very old school. So you've got this organization that has deep roots in traditional marketing, and it starts to become an organization that has to kind of adapt with the times. You come in and you're accountable in the marketing role for doing a lot of different things. You had brochures to create, you had websites to maintain, you had social media to think about, then came content. And then later on, you became HubSpot certified, and like
Yeah.
all of these different things that you had to take on. Can you talk a little bit about how you were, how did you adapt to that? Because coming out of school, were you coming out thinking that you were going to be a marketer? Did you think that there was a certain set of skills that you were going to have to leverage here? You know, because you really got dropped into like, hey, here's the wealth of marketing. And I think a lot of marketers these days have the benefit to a certain extent of really specializing, where you got dropped into a role where you had to learn a little bit of everything, even stuff now that we look at and we're like, oh, that's quaint, a brochure. But you
Yeah.
did all of these things and you had to kind of adapt to them. How did you do that? Do you think that you were prepared for that coming out of school, and kind of what did you learn from it?
Okay, so to be fair to Villanova, I loved my education. I think Villanova was an amazing place. But, and I think when you were in that time, we're talking about 2005, everything was transitioning from kind of the old way of doing things into this new digital way. So, we were in school learning I have a concentration in public relations. We were learning how to make sure that the AP style was in all of the press releases that we were writing, because we're going to fax them to newspapers. Okay. So that's what I learned in school. And again, I love Villanova. I learned so much inside and out of the classroom. But when I think about setting me up for marketing, it was really a challenge. So when I got into the real world and the school of hard knocks and was able to really learn, it was amazing to see, 6 months after graduation, some of that stuff we learned was already starting to feel a bit antiquated. And so we needed to make sure, with the limited time and budget and staff that we had, that we weren't wasting time on these older antiquated processes, but we were really moving forward. And so I think there's a time to show respect for what's worked in the past and honor what is still working, but then always have one foot in this new world of, we got to be on top of things. And well, but we worked in the summer camp industry. So our core market was teenagers. So we had to be cool and on top of these platforms, but at the same time, making sure that we were staying true to our brand and who we had been as a legacy brand. So it was a really interesting and absolutely fascinating time to be in marketing. And then when I met you, social media was just this wild thing that nobody knew what was coming with that.
So two points about this I'm curious about, which is one, how in your role being accountable for pushing the organization forward, also maintaining the things that have always worked, how did you determine where to spend your time and how to allocate your time around, like, should we be on Snapchat now? Should we? So how did you go about assessing opportunities to determine what you should be doing in that role?
Yeah, so I was a big proponent of trying and testing, but always having, most of our eggs in the basket that we knew worked, right? So Instagram's a great example. Instagram came along and it seemed like people are gravitating to this, but Facebook is still kind of a core where our audience is hanging out. So we were always nimble enough that we could move forward without neglecting what had worked for us. So it was always about just balancing time and money and resources into, these are the things that we know are working. We have a marketing plan for the year, but 10-20% of our time, efforts, and energy are going to go towards these new things, because if we're not moving forward, we're going to die on the vine. So it was really just about balancing that and making sure that we weren't just chasing new things for the sake of chasing them, but really understanding, okay, our demographic, our audience is already there. Let's make sure that we have a presence there, so we're keeping up with them.
When I think of you as a CMO and our interactions over the years, I'm struck by how well-rounded you always seem to me. And I wanted to ask you about the kind of the skill set of the future of marketers, because I think there's a perception out there when you say marketing that people just immediately think, oh, you're like the creative type, right? Like there's this kind of instinctual response that like the marketers are the kids that like didn't hang out in the finance classes. But as I watched as I watched you work as a CMO, I was consistently struck by how many additional things were really on your plate. So I want you to kind of rank these if you could in terms of, and I would not be surprised, of course, if you came back and said they're all equal and important, but I'm curious your perspective on it. So ranking these different things, because I saw these as being components of your work. So there's creativity as being one piece, organization, the ability to take and, get projects across the finish line. The science of marketing, sort of the analytics and the testing and the tracking and those sorts of things. Team management as being the fourth piece of it. And let's just stick with those four. Let's those are, I was going to give you a fifth, but let's stay with those four. So you've got those four pieces that are kind of responsibilities of a CMO. You've got to be creative and constantly thinking about the next thing. You've got to be thinking about how you keep all of the teams organized and get projects across the finish line. You've got to think about not just the creativity side, the art of marketing, but also the science of marketing. And then you've got people to deal with. How would you rank the importance of each of those different categories if you had to rank them 1 to 4?
So I would say that they shifted as my career shifted. So at the beginning, it was really about creativity because that was really the area that I could play. And I was an intern, and then I was a marketing manager and director. And so I really kind of had that space to play in. I learned very quickly that as the leader of the marketing team, I had to have the organization and the time management and the team management, locked and loaded, because that was my job that only I could do. We can hire a graphics designer. We can hire someone to make ads for us. We brought in a team member who could physically make the ads inside of social media. But what I was really good at was organizing and managing the team. And over time, I really realized the importance of that, because if the team doesn't know what direction they're headed or what their priorities are, they're kind of lost. They don't know why we're doing something or when it's due. So I really, over time, saw my value increase, and the amount of time that it took me to properly manage a team increased dramatically. I talk about this a lot with people because I think managers don't realize how much time it takes to be a good manager. So they think, well, I have to be, creative and checking the science of this marketing, underestimating dramatically how much time it takes to lead a team and to be a really good leader. So I would say, to answer your question, at the beginning of my career, the creativity was important. Then as analytics became more advanced, the science became really important. As I ended my career in marketing, I would say the organization and the team stuff really took over for me personally in the role that I was in.
That makes sense. And by the way, the fifth element I was going to add in there was vendor management, because I think that's something that you really excelled. And we could do an entire episode just about vendor management.
And I consider that as part of managing the team, really, because to me, the vendors were such a critical component of our team. And, we should state, I had a small team with a small budget, and we were a seasonal business. So it wasn't as if we had this luxury to say, oh, we missed a deadline, let's do it again in 6 months. It's like, no, every single year we had new summer programs running. So we had to be organized. We had to be on a strict schedule, or like if we missed a season, we missed the business. So that was really kind of a driving force behind everything that kept us really organized.
It's interesting that you put vendor management in with team management. And I think that probably is a clue to why you were so good at it, is because that really was one of the distinguishing features watching you work with other vendors was how much you invited them into the process and how much you tried to treat them like they were part of your team. So it's interesting you phrased it that way. I also think that it's really a good takeaway there that as you move into more of a leadership role, the pressure for you to be art and science of marketing, or even like in any role that you're doing, once you're stepping more out of the doing and more into like the leading a team, the less your hard skills matter and the more your soft skills matter. I'm not classifying productivity and organization as a soft skill so much as the team management aspect, but I think that that's a really good takeaway for people when they think about their career in marketing, potentially thinking about how they can't just neglect those skills until they get to the role of leader, but that's something they need to be working on the whole time. And that if you're not excelling in the art and science of marketing, it may be difficult for you to get to that role where you're actually going to be able to oversee people.
Yeah.
So it's a really, it's kind of a call to action to be like holistic in your thinking about your
For
career.
sure. And the other thing I think is important, just as a heads up to people, is if you really love the creative side of it, you love designing, you love copywriting, you love building websites, you might not want to be the leader. And I think that's something that people just sort of say, well, my career path is this, and I'm ultimately going to be the leader. But being in a leadership role isn't for everyone. And if you really, like, I talk a lot about the zone of genius, like, what's your zone of genius? You know, what lights you on fire? What fuels you? If it's doing the physical creative work, then being the leader probably isn't going to satisfy you, because I never designed an ad or wrote a Facebook ad for the last, 2, 3, 4 years. I proofread them. I looked at them. I gave my 2 cents, but I didn't create them. I didn't write them. And I think that's just something for people to be mindful of. Like, if you don't want to be the leader, that's okay.
Yeah, and I think another aspect of that, and this is just a prelude to my forthcoming book that's going to be coming out after The Lovable Leader. I've already begun planning it. But this concept of role-based leaders, where if you're really good at graphic design, maybe the area of leadership you have is being a really kick-ass graphic designer. And when it comes time for those discussions, you step up and show leadership. But that doesn't mean you need a title change or need to have people under you or anything like that. It just means that in that unique, narrowly defined thing that you're like, that's where I want to show leadership, is in my particular skill set. So I think even the definition of leadership probably could expand a little bit to incorporate other people and give them the space to just be good at the thing that they're good at and show leadership in that way. Mm-hmm. I think where this naturally leads us to is it's a good pivot point for us to talk about productivity, because so much of your work at JKCP and coming out of that led you, when you decided on a career shift after JKCP, I remember us talking about a lot of different things, and you were coming up with this idea of So Productive, and you gravitated towards this idea of productivity. And it's interesting because at the time you brought it up, I was like, but Sarah, you're a marketer. Like, you're a marketer, you've been a CMO for all this time, you've been in marketing with productivity. And then when you started to explain it to me, it made a lot more sense. So help connect the dots for people that maybe weren't, that maybe are slow like me and didn't pick up on that connection of going from CMO to productivity coach. How did that occur to you that was the logical next step for you?
Yeah. So really 2 to 3 years before I made the transition, I had this thing just gnawing at me, and it was a positive gnaw, but it was there. And there was always this, I love productivity. If there's a podcast about it, I'm listening to it. If there's a book, I'm reading it. It just gives me an energy I can't describe. And so I loved consuming the content. I love putting things into practice. I loved testing new productivity systems for myself, for my team. And so it just was something that I really, really naturally gravitated towards. So there was some respect. I couldn't ignore this anymore. I had to do something with it because I just had a force driving me towards it. On the other side of it, I had to be productive. I didn't have a choice. We had 25 summer camps. We had kids from 140 countries. We were on, I think we had at the highest point, 8 different college campuses that they were on. This was a big operation. We had 500 seasonal staff that had to be hired, trained, managed. I mean, this wasn't like people think summer camp and think of this small thing and, oh, that must have been a fun part-time job you did in the summer. No, this was a big business that was quite an operation. And it was seasonal again. So we had to have processes. We had to have systems. We had to get so much done with a small budget and a small team. So I really didn't have a choice. And I developed these systems that really worked. And that's when I said, I can teach this to other people. I've been a burned out, stressed out, maxed out, busy professionals. And I really think I can help other people feel more at peace in the evening, more relaxed in the evening, because they had a process and a system to get all their things done during the day. So it was, calling a force from the universe, call it what you want. I just I couldn't get away from productivity. It found me.
So before we get into, I want to talk a little bit about your productivity system that you've developed. Before we get there, though, I think this is a really interesting thing just to touch on really quickly, is that you went from college to a job, you grew in that job for a long time, and then you decided to become an entrepreneur. And I say decided because some people, I think, are forced into the position. They're like, oh, well, I guess I'll just start a business for myself because there's no other opportunities. But like, no, you had opportunities. You had
Yes.
opportunities lined up. There were people that were like, I will hire you for this amount of money.
Yeah.
And you were like, yes, that seems like a lot of money and safe. I'm going to jump into the deep end and start my own business, which is a terrifying thing to most people. And looking at your entire setup, most people would probably assume that you would not do something like that you would not opt for the less safe route. And the fact that you're married to an entrepreneur, even more so, you're thinking, well, let's all put our eggs in this unsafe basket. So can you explain a little bit how you even came to decide to do this crazy thing that we do of like starting your own business and putting it all on yourself and all on your shoulders?
Yeah. So to the credit to the organization I was at, Julian Krinsky and Julian Krinsky, the person, Adrian Castelli, Steve Robertson, this is a company that had really amazing leaders who taught me how to be an entrepreneur. Like I was learning on the front lines. And so there's a book behind me and my color-coded books back there called Rocket Fuel. And it's a book about the visionary and what's the term? Now I'm forgetting it, but it's basically the person who does all of the work. And so it's an entrepreneur. And you were actually, Jeff, one of the first people who ever called me that. And what happened was the real entrepreneurs of our company were visionaries, and they cast visions left, right, and center, and would come back to the office and say, all right, Sarah, like, can you make this happen by, 2 weeks from now? And I'd be like, yep. So I was always kind of forced into that role of, all right, I'll figure it out. Like, give me a deadline, give me a to-do list, and I'll get it done and I'll just figure it out. And we were launching new camps we had medicine, we had a Moneyball program with Wharton, things that I necessarily don't know about. But I took it as an opportunity to learn, expand my horizon, and grow. So I always saw these challenges as a growth opportunity. And that's really how I learned. I taught myself how to build a website because we needed it. And we felt like we were getting, pricing too high. And so I taught myself that. I taught myself how to do ads. I taught myself HubSpot and then got certified. So I just think I was blessed to have the opportunity to be in an entrepreneurial minded company with entrepreneurs at the helm. And that really taught me how to be an entrepreneur. And then I was in that intrapreneur space for many, many, many years. And it's a big responsibility. And I had responsibility in my past career. So I wasn't afraid of that.
So that gave you some confidence, but you're still standing on the edge of the cliff. And you know that if you just turn around, there's plenty of safe ways to get to the bottom of that cliff. Nice, comfy, cozy, luxury sedan, take you all the way down to the bottom.
Yeah.
Screw it. I'll jump and I'll figure out how to build a parachute on the way down. Part of it was that you felt confident from being surrounded with the entrepreneurs, but that can't be all that it was. There had to be something else there. And the reason I ask is that I'm trying to understand, because you and I are different in this sense. I've never been able to do the thing that you did at JKCP, which is to have and hold down a job for any longer than like a year and a half. I'm not built that way. I can't do it. And I've always really, almost entirely until I met you, I've believed that we're just two different types of people entirely, the entrepreneurs and the 9-to-5ers. Like we have different brains. We look at things differently. We just are different. But you bridged the gap. You were like, I can play in both worlds. And most of the people that I know that played in the world that you previously were in are absolutely abject terrified of the entrepreneur life. And I know that for me, the idea of having a job is pure terror. It's just like confining. I feel like I can't breathe. You're able to play in both. There was a moment where you had to make a decision that you're going to do this. And that is far larger than I think what we've talked about so far has given it credit for. How did you have the confidence in yourself that you could go and do this thing? Or why were you willing to roll the dice?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And I also remembered the term from the book, which is an integrator.
Integrator.
And the integrator helps the entrepreneurs get the things done. So I think that's also really part of it. So for me, a lot of this was about permission. And I felt like I've been having this calling for a little while. I feel like I can do this. I was listening to a ton of podcasts and reading books, and at some point I just thought, well, if those people can do it, why can't I? But when you talk about a moment, it was really about permission, and it was about, what do I want, and what do I want my legacy to be, and what do I want to share with people. And Jeff, you and I have talked about this, but like, I really want people to believe that they can get enough done, that they feel like they have a sense of calm, so that they can really enjoy their lives. And I want to give people permission to have freedom and choice in how they spend their time. So kind of all these things that are much deeper than productivity and getting things done was this driving force for me. And I just felt like, if I'm capable and I have something that I need to share with the world, then this is my chance to do it. And truthfully, what's the worst that could happen? Right? Because I can figure it out. If this doesn't work, or another thing I want to do doesn't work, or a certain program I developed doesn't work, I'll adjust and adapt, because I always have done that. But I really would have regretted not trying. And now, as I sit here, a year later, I'm so grateful that I went for it. But I think it was really about like giving myself permission. And that's a loaded word, but that was really the word that kept coming back.
I love it. So what do you do nowadays then? So I know what you do, but for those listening, and to help set up when we move into the next phase, and we're going to talk about productivity, what do you do now? What are the sort of things that you generally offer to people? How do you spend your day? What does running your own productivity coaching business look like?
Yeah. So, people are stressed and facing burnout at work all the time. So, what I try to do is teach people how to clarify their thoughts, organize their work, and take action, so that they can have enough time at the end of the day to really relax and recharge. So how does that shake out, right? So it looks like I'm a one-on-one coach. So I help busy professionals one-on-one who want to do private coaching sessions with me to talk about their challenges, their productivity, their time management, the things that are keeping them awake at night, what's keeping them away from their families. And we work through really implementing systems and best practices for them. And then on the other side of things, I'm doing a lot of training and speaking engagements right now, because businesses have, obviously, we've all transitioned to working from home, and pretty soon we're about to transition back. And that's been a really strange time for teams, for leaders, for employees. Everyone's had to shuffle around and adjust. So I'm doing a lot of speaking and training right now on clear communication, time management, setting boundaries, setting priorities, and training teams on that front. So that's been a lot of fun.
If productivity were a pie chart, what percentage of it, what size of the pie would be the systems and processes, the hard skills of productivity, versus the things that are more mindset related, or potentially like soft skills, communication, things like that? How would you break those down? Do you think it's a 50-50 thing? Do you think that it's like an 80-20 thing? Like how would you look at it?
Yeah, I would probably say it's 70-30, 70 in the mindset part, because it's so interesting. I talk about, and this is an example from Brene Brown, but when we text someone and we see those three little dots, we fill in the blank of what's about to come back at us. So, Jeff, are you mad at me?
Dot, 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 dot.
Dot, dot, dot. And then I'm waiting for your response. And in the meantime, I'm thinking, oh gosh, he is so mad at me. He's upset about this, or I didn't get back to his email fast enough. And I fill in all of these blanks about what's going on. And I'm wasting a lot of time and mental energy thinking about that. So I really believe a lot of it is this mental part, and how we're interpreting things, how we're valuing ourself and our time. And and how we interact with other people is a really big part of this. And then, 30%, the processes and procedures, which is almost the easier part. It's certainly easier to implement. But I think that's where the coaching's helpful, because we can get through some of that mindset stuff together.
It's so interesting to me that you framed it that way, because I was not expecting that. Is like when I asked that question and your little 3 little dots were going and you were about to answer that question. In my head, I was like, she's totally going to say, when you said 70-30, I was like, oh yeah, totally. 70% systems, 30% mindset. And I think part of that is that for me, the approach to productivity, I feel like my mindset is geared towards it. Like I have priorities. I want to accomplish things. I know what I'm after. So just give me the systems to do it and I'll adhere to it. So like mindset, like I'm locked in and loaded. So when you said it the other way around, I found that very interesting. All right. So let's go through your system a little bit. Let's talk about that. So you have a system that you created.
Yes.
Talk us through that a little bit. And you alluded to it a little bit in talking about what it is that you do.
Yeah. So the first is clarify, and that's the C. So it's COAT, COAT. And the first is clarify, which is where people should be asking the question, what and why? And Jeff, you've been through a lot of, discovery meetings with people, proposals, working with different clients. This is actually a step that I find gets missed a lot, right? What are we doing? What is it exactly? And this is where you're getting clarity. Very specifically, we're going to deliver these 3 points. We are going to do this initiative. This is the expectation for this particular project. And you really can't get too granular here. The more clarity you can get on what you're doing, the better. So that's really the first step. The other part of clarify is why. Why are we doing it? And there's a stat that 40% of employees have no idea how their work contributes to the greater goal of the company. That's a lot.
Yeah.
And so, when we don't know why the work we're doing matters or what the purpose of it really is, it's really demotivating, right? You're like, well, my boss isn't even going to notice I did this, or, this isn't contributing to the bottom line. This feels like I'm paper pushing and I'm doing busy work. And so as leaders, it's really important to explain to your team, Jeff, this project is so important because it's going to help the client with this. It's moving the business forward. So leaders should be able to explain why, but then the team member, it's a great opportunity to ask, in a kind way, why are we doing this? and really get clarity around what and why. So that's the C.
Got it. It's interesting and I've heard you talk about COAT before. And this is the first time I'm piecing together that there's actually a really direct line of sight between productivity and brand. If you don't know what the company is about and what you're trying to accomplish in the world, the productivity side of things, the tasks that are being assigned, the projects that are being created don't have any actual real context to it. And for that stat that you gave about people not understanding how their work ties back to the bigger vision, if you don't have the bigger vision, if you don't have the bigger brand purpose, then that's just naturally going to be missing in all of the work. I've never actually made that connection in hearing you talk about it before, but it's funny how so much of the business is all aligned.
Yeah. And it's about aligning your team. And honestly, a lot of why is aligning your own purpose. I'm working with a client right now who's thinking about her career and is it time to make a transition? And so one of the things that we're working on is, what do you want? Why are you doing what you're doing? And it's really thinking about purpose and what's important to you and what's really important to you. Because it's so easy to say, oh, yep, I got to get all these tasks done today. Well, why? Why do you have to get up and go work with the trainer at the gym? Why do you have to make an organic, very healthy, carb-free meal? I don't know, so it's like thinking about what's important to you. And maybe that, like to me, exercise is important to me. I'm going to have that be a part of my day. But it's not the same for everybody. So thinking about, why these things really matter to you. Why are these things on the to-do list? Why are these things, eating up such a large portion of your day? So we could do a whole podcast about why, but.
Yeah, for sure. Clarity being the first step. It's very similar to the first step in strategy, is getting clear on like where we're going, what exactly are we doing, where are we going, why are we getting there, the whole thing. So now we've clarified things as the first step in our productivity journey. What do we do next?
So then we organize. So this is when we say, okay, we know what we're doing. We know we're going to do it. Now we need to organize when we're going to do it, where we're going to do it, and who is going to do it. So probably the easiest step is who. Is this something that I'm going to take on? Is this something I'm delegating to a team member? Who is responsible? Because so often we've all gotten the email where there's 5 people on the email. And then we think, oh yeah, like Susie will respond or John will respond, and then nobody responds, right? So it's really critical when you're organizing your work to say, okay, Sarah, you're doing this. Jeff, you're doing that. So again, simple step, but that gets missed quite a bit. The other thing is when. This is basically a due date. Again, another thing that gets missed a lot. And I always say, if you want it done, it needs a due date. Now, due dates can change because people get really freaked out about due dates, but it is this kind of guiding light to say, that's next Friday. We've got to prioritize that. We've got to get that done. And then the final step of organize is where. And this one's a little bit interesting because so often we can do work in various locations. So I have my office is set up. I've got 2 screens. When I'm recording a podcast, I have to be here. This is where my setup is for recording a podcast. There's other things that I can do that I could do from the sofa. There's little small tasks that I can do while I'm in the drive-through line at Starbucks. There are things that take, 5 minutes. So it's really about assigning basically like a little tag to certain tasks to say, where am I going to get this task done? Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. Context, additional context. Got it. Okay, so we've clarified and then we've gone about organizing. Is there anything else on organizing that you want to touch on before we move to the next step in the process?
Yep. No, that's it for organize. So when, where, who.
Okay.
Then it's time to action, right? You're going to get these tasks done. So you have to think about how you're going to do that. And then just really outline the task. And so this is where you'll take your, setting 3 priorities for tomorrow, putting those things on your calendar. This is how you're going to get it done. And again, this isn't rocket science, but one of the things I hear a lot from people is, I have a goal or I want to write a book one day. And I say, how much time are you taking every week to do that? I haven't worked on that in 3 years, but I wanted to.
Yeah.
And so this concept of action is really about how you're going to get it done, breaking down the simple tasks to get it done. If you want to write a book, break it down into, I'm going to write, 100 words a day. Great. And then put that on your calendar so you surely have the time to take action. So that's that step.
Got it. I like real quick. I just want to point out that you placed prioritization inside of action, which I think is interesting because under organize, you have due dates. And I think so often people, they confuse when something is due versus when something is a priority.
Yes.
Because you may have to mail a letter tomorrow, and you may also have to get a proposal in the mail that's worth $100,000 or via email or something, let's say, right? They may be due on the same time, but one is a higher priority than the other. And I think it's important at that action stage to elevate that concept of being more thoughtful about your priorities versus just about what's due. So I appreciate that you move that into the action stage rather than having it during the organization stage. Although I'm sure there's some prioritization that you would do there, but I like that prior to taking action, really asking yourself, is this something that helps to feed the priorities that I currently have? So yeah. I like that you elevated that. All right. So what's the final step in the process?
So this is the fun one. This is T. This is take time. And this is really about taking time, taking a break, celebrating your accomplishments. So I surveyed a lot of busy professionals and I said, what do you do when you finish a big project? How do you celebrate that? Oh, nothing. I don't. Am I supposed to be doing that? And I got just like the funniest answers from people. And we are so guilty of, okay, I finished the task, on to the next thing. I finished the task, on to the next thing.
Yep.
Because we're typically, high achievers and we want to get so much done. But our bodies physically need to reset. We need to recharge. If we're going to be our best selves tomorrow, we need to rest tonight and get a good night's sleep and not be up stressed all night long. So this is really about hitting the reset button, but also giving yourself a pat on the back. And that could be, I wrapped up recording this podcast with you. I think it's great. I'm going to go grab a cup of tea afterwards before I dive into the next project. So it can be something small. It can be something, we launched a new website and that was huge. I'm going to take a couple days off or I'm going to book a vacation. So I think And it's really just about taking a few moments, big or small, to just honor yourself. Like you're probably getting more done than you even imagine. And so it's just important to honor yourself. And then it's also a great time to honor team members. Say thank you. Thank you goes such a long way. And it's just a thing that we write in our email. Hey, oh, thanks. Thank you. Like, I got it. But I think it's appropriate to take time to really say, hey, Jeff, like, what you did today was great. And I really appreciate you doing that. That helped our team a lot. So it's time for yourself, and also time to just, honor those who helped you get there.
Is there one of those that you think, one, by and large, people struggle with the most? And then, being introspective and vulnerable for us, is there one that you struggle with the most?
Yeah, well, guilt. People feel really guilty about taking time. They feel like, well, it's my job to do that, so I'm just gonna move on to the next thing, or I need to work to a certain time on the clock to get things done. So people feel really guilty about taking little breaks or taking a moment for themselves. Yeah, I'm guilty of it also, for sure. I'm guilty of being guilty. Because it is there, we want to accomplish more. And as a driven entrepreneur, I always am, on, and I could get a few more things done. I could talk to a few more people. I could be on a few more podcasts, whatever it is. And so it's definitely about creating some balance and some boundaries for yourself to say, I did enough today. This feels good. I'm going to take the night off.
That's awesome. So for people who were to implement something like this, what's sort of your big hope for people walking away from this episode, or people that choose to work with you? What's your big hope for them? And then, kind of domino effect, what's your hope of what that leads to out in the world, in the climate, in the culture?
Yeah. Well, this culture of work and this rat race, and we're always on, and we have our devices at our fingertips, and we need to respond 24/7. Whenever someone messages us, we have to respond. It's not helping anybody. And burnout is now officially recognized by the World Health Organization as an official condition. So this is real. This is not something to mess around with. So if you're feeling stressed, burned out, overwhelmed, like, take this podcast episode as permission, as this is a time to hit the reset button, because you don't have to live that way. You can be successful between the hours of 9 to 5. You can get so much work done if you are, focused on the right things that are really important to you and move the needle for you. So I just want to empower people to say, you don't have to live this way. You don't have to be stressed out and maxed out forever. There is another way, and I can help you get there.
Awesome. That's fantastic. Well, Sarah, you have been a phenomenal guest. I had no doubt that you would be. For people that are interested in learning more about you, learning more how they can work with you, where they can pick up any of your free material and insights and ideas, this is a chance in the show to just completely promote yourself unabashedly. Shameless self-promotion time. Go for it.
Well, working with a coach is a real personal experience. So I think it's great for you to get to know me, connect with me, follow me on Instagram, so.productive. I also have a free guide for everybody listening today, because setting priorities is really important right now. It's something that we're all faced with. So I have 10 questions to ask when you're setting priorities. And these are really critical questions you can just shoot through and say, oh, nope, not a priority, or I'm moving that to a different day. So you can find that at so-productive.com/priorities.
Awesome. And then one thing I'll add in there that's promotion on both of our behalves is that both you and I are Asana certified pros, and recently have been working on some joint projects together and putting together a joint offering. So if you're out there and your organization uses Asana and is having some trouble figuring out how to maximize the potential of it, Sarah and I both work together to create an offering that can help supercharge Asana at your organization. And we come at it from slightly different angles. So you're getting a really a 360-degree view of how to be more productive and more priority driven at work. So if you're interested in that, we'll put some links in the show notes, and you can connect with either of us, or you can connect with either of us individually. Those are always in the show notes as well. Sarah, you've been a phenomenal guest. The content was really valuable. I think your methodology is really useful. It's something that people should do themselves, and they should probably tell other people about. And if they tell other people about it, I guess that would make it shareable. Wait, don't leave. If you've never listened to my fancy outro, do it just once for me, please. Okay, if you enjoy Shareable, and you find it valuable, there's a few ways that you can support the show. One, you can share it on social media, which I strongly encourage. I mean, it's literally the name of the show. Shareable. Two, you can review it on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're an Overcast user, as many of my listeners are, make sure to click that star button on the episodes that you like. The third way that you can support the show is by blogging about it or discussing it on your own podcast, or even by making a YouTube video where you talk about one of the episodes. And then the final way that you can support the show is by supporting it directly on Patreon. You can find the link in the show notes. Now, before I let you go, I want to tell you about one other thing. You see, Shareable is just one of many projects that I'm working on at any given time. I've got another podcast called Rogue. I do a live streaming show every week called The Heroic Council. I've got a blog where I release a blog post twice a week. And if you're looking to keep up with all sorts of different content that can help you grow and become a superhero in life, I want you to check out jeffgibbard.me. That's where I list all of my current projects and projects that are coming up in the future, including my forthcoming book, The Lovable Leader. It would mean a lot to me if you could go and check out some of the other things I've worked on, because I put just as much of my heart into those projects as I do into Shareable. Thank you so much for being a listener. Thank you for being a supporter, and I hope to see you here on the next episode of Shareable.